All right, so let's get right into it today. We're going to do a deep dive into the Reacher series on Amazon Prime. I know you're into crime dramas, so I think you'll enjoy this one. And especially since you like to see how books are adapted for the screen, we've got a stack of articles and reviews, even some behind-the-scenes info.
Yeah, it's become a bit of a phenomenon, hasn't it? Like it's really tapped into something that audiences are really wanting right now. And I think the way it's adapted has a lot to do with that.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. I'm curious about that whole debate, about staying true to the source material versus bringing something new. But before we get into all that, let's start with the basics. Who is this Jack Reacher character? He's not exactly your typical detective.
He's more like a force of nature, really, this ex-military policeman. Yeah. Travels light, lives by his own code, and just seems to attract trouble wherever he goes. And he can take down a whole room full of bad guys without breaking a sweat. But he's also got this sharp mind, picks up on the tiniest details.
It's that minimalist lifestyle that's a big part of his character, too, right?
Mm.
Almost like a nomad just drifting from place to place with nothing but the clothes on his back and a thirst for justice. I remember that scene where he buys a new shirt and just throws the old one away. It's like, possessions don't mean anything to him.
Exactly. He's totally unburdened by material things, free to just move and act as he sees fit. It's pretty different from the kind of complicated lives most of us lead. I think it's almost aspirational in a way, just shedding all your baggage and living in the moment. But it's also a reflection of his past, too, right? The things he carries from his time in the military.
That's interesting you bring that up, because one thing that really stood out to me about Reacher is how they portray his military background. It's not just some backstory. It's like woven into the whole show, shaping how he sees the world, his actions, even the way he talks to people.
Oh, absolutely. The show definitely doesn't shy away from the darkness that comes with that experience, the scars it can leave on a person. But it also highlights the skills and the resilience that comes with that experience, the scars it can leave on a person. But it also highlights the skills and the resilience that Reacher got from his time in the military.
Yeah, talking about skills. Yeah, let's talk about the success of this show. I mean, this isn't just any crime drama. Reacher broke records for Amazon. It was their most streamed show during its first week out, and season 2 got a crazy 98% on Rotten Tomatoes. What do you think it is about this adaptation that has connected with viewers and critics so strongly?
Well, I think part of it is the timing. There's this certain feeling right now, a sense of disillusionment and this yearning for someone who can just cut through all the BS and deliver justice. And Reacher just fits into that perfectly. He isn't afraid to bend the rules, get his hands dirty, to fight for what he believes in, even if it means going up against really powerful people. That kind of heroism is appealing, especially in a world that feels so uncertain and unjust these days.
I see what you mean. It's like he represents the basic desire for fairness, for someone to stand up and say, enough is enough. But there's also that question of adaptation, right?
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier that Reacher balances staying true to the books while also bringing new things to the show.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think they manage that?
From what I've read, it seems like Lee Child, the author, is really involved. It's not like he's just giving it a thumbs up and that's it. He's actually working with the writers, making sure they capture the spirit of the books.
Okay, so they've got the author's blessing. That's huge. But that doesn't mean they're just copying the books word for word. There are some differences, right?
Right. Season 1 is based on Killing Floor, the first book, but they actually introduce this character, Francis Neagley, who isn't in the book at all.
Oh, that's interesting. So they are making changes, even adding new characters. As long as it works with the story, I guess the question is, does it work? Does it feel like the world that Lee Child created?
From the reviews and even Lee Child's own words, it seems like they've found a good balance. Fans of the books are happy that the main things are still there. And people who are new to Reacher find the show engaging and easy to get into. It's a tough thing to do, but it seems like they've made both sides happy.
Thinking about Neagley, it's interesting that they decided to bring in this female character who's so capable and complex. She's not just there as a love interest or someone who needs rescuing. She's right there with Reacher every step of the way.
Absolutely, and I think that shows how the show is updating some parts of the Reacher universe. The main themes of justice, morality, and fighting corruption are all still there. But they're looking at them through a more modern lens, with more awareness of diversity and how power dynamics really work.
It makes you wonder how Lee Child feels about those updates. Like, on the one hand, he created this whole world, these characters, but then he's also handing it over to new storytellers who are bringing their own ideas and interpretations.
That's what makes adaptations so fascinating. It's a collaboration, a conversation between the original creator and the people who are reimagining the work for a new audience. And it seems like that conversation is going pretty well with Reacher.
So we've got a really interesting main character, record-breaking success, and what looks like a really respectful adaptation. But what about the deeper stuff you mentioned, that Reacher deals with themes of justice, morality, and corruption? I'm curious to hear more about that. It's not just a mindless action show, right? There's something more going on.
Oh, absolutely. And this is where it gets really interesting, especially for someone like you who enjoys crime dramas
Hmm.
that explore those deeper themes. One of the biggest questions the show asks is about vigilante justice. I mean, Reacher operates outside the law. He's like a one-man wrecking crew taking down bad guys. But is that really justice, or is it just another form of chaos?
Yeah, I was thinking about that a lot while I was watching. It feels good to see the bad guys get what's coming to them,
Mm-hmm.
but it also makes you think about the limits of the law and if it's okay to take justice into your own hands.
Exactly. It's not a simple black and white issue. The show really makes us face those gray areas, those uncomfortable truths about the world. And
Yeah.
it does it without losing that entertainment factor. It's a tough balance, but I think Reacher pulls it off.
Yeah, I agree. It's not preachy. It doesn't try to force a message on you. It makes you question things and come to your own conclusions. And for me, that's what makes a crime drama really engaging.
Yeah, it's interesting how they handle these big questions about justice and morality, but they still give you those awesome action scenes, those moments where you just have to admire the choreography, the sheer brutality of it all.
Oh, for sure. The fight scenes are raw, visceral,
Yeah.
and incredibly well done. They're not over the top or like stylized like you see in some action movies.
Yeah.
It feels real, like you're watching an actual street fight. And it really shows how Reacher's military training makes him such a powerful opponent.
I read somewhere that Alan Richardson actually did a lot of his own stunts, which makes it even more impressive. He really embodies the physicality of Reacher.
Yeah, it really shows that dedication to authenticity. And it's not just brute strength either. They also highlight Reacher's strategic mind, how he assesses a situation, analyzes his opponents, and uses the environment to his advantage. It's like they're saying, yeah, this guy's a beast, but he's also really smart, and that makes him even more dangerous. It's not just about punching your way out. You got to outsmart your opponents.
Yeah. And that connects to another theme the show explores, identity. Reacher is this enigma with a mysterious past constantly moving, trying to outrun something, or maybe even searching for something, some purpose or a sense of belonging.
It's funny you mentioned that unburdened thing before, but I'm not so sure if that's really true. It seems like he carries a lot of weight with him,
Yeah.
figuratively and literally. He's haunted by his past, what he's seen and done.
Right. Maybe his minimalist lifestyle is just a way of coping, trying to simplify things, strip away the distractions, and just focus on what's essential.
Hmm.
But the past always finds a way to catch up, no matter how far you run.
And that makes him such an interesting character, doesn't it? There's this depth to him, this complexity that goes beyond just being a tough guy.
Oh, absolutely. And the show does a great job of slowly revealing those layers. Through flashbacks, his interactions with other characters, even those quiet moments where you see the man beneath the tough exterior.
And it's not just Reacher. The other characters are really well developed too. I especially like the dynamic between Reacher and Frances Neagley.
Yeah, their relationship is really something. She's his equal, in a lot of ways intelligent, resourceful, just as capable in a fight. But she brings a different perspective too, a more measured approach,
Hmm.
which challenges Reacher's impulsiveness.
It's a real partnership based on respect and trust. And you get the sense that they have this short history that we only see bits and pieces of. It makes you wonder what they've been through together, what secrets they share.
It's a great example of show don't tell. The writers give us enough to make us curious without explaining everything, so the audience can fill in the blanks, imagine their own backstory for these characters.
Speaking of backstory, I really like how Reacher uses its setting to create atmosphere.
Mm.
Enhance the storytelling. It's mostly filmed in Canada, but they make it look like the gritty towns and landscapes of the American South.
Yeah, I read an article where the production designer talked about that. They were very careful about choosing locations that would evoke a certain mood, a sense of place that's both familiar and a bit unsettling.
Yeah, you get those wide open spaces, those stretches of empty highway. That create a sense of isolation, of being on the edge of things.
Yeah.
And then you have those cramped interiors, those dark bars and back alleys, where it feels like danger is around every corner.
And the way it's filmed really amplifies those feelings. Lots of natural, light, stark contrasts, deep shadows. It's a very visual style, both gritty and beautiful.
It's not just about showing the action. It's about using visuals to tell a story, to get across emotions and pull the viewer into that world. I'm also curious about the music in Reacher. There's this distinct sound, a mix of bluesy riffs and atmospheric stuff that adds so much to the mood.
The music is definitely key. I read an interview with the composer. They wanted to make a soundtrack that felt modern but also timeless. something that would evoke the American South but also reflect Reacher's inner world.
It's interesting you say that because I noticed how the music often mirrors Reacher's emotions.
Yeah.
Like sometimes it's almost mournful, reflecting the weight he carries. And then you get those driving, pulsing tracks that go with the action and violence.
It's like the music is another layer of storytelling, another way to get inside Reacher's head and understand him.
And it's not just the big moments either. There are these subtle cues, little touches that add so much to even the quiet scenes. It's obvious that they put a lot of thought into the music.
It's all about creating that immersive experience, isn't it? Pulling the viewer in, making them feel like they're right there with Reacher, seeing the world through his eyes.
You know, one of the things I really like about Reacher is that it doesn't take itself too seriously. It deals with some serious themes, but there's also this sense of humor, this playfulness, that keeps it from getting too dark or heavy.
Oh, totally. Reacher's dry wit and those little moments of comedy are a big part of what makes the show so charming. It's like a little wink to the audience, a reminder that we're all in on the joke, even when things get intense.
I love the scenes where the other characters react to Reacher's quirks. He's so out of place in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And their reactions to his bluntness or his unusual ways of doing things are just hilarious.
It's those little moments of human connection, that warmth and humor, that make the show so relatable even when it's dealing with dark and violent stuff.
Speaking of human connection, let's talk about some of the other characters in Reacher's world. You mentioned Frances Neagley, who's fantastic. But there are so many others who bring their own energy to the show.
Definitely. One of the things I like about Reacher is that the supporting characters aren't just there for the plot. They're well-rounded individuals with their own motives, their complexities, and often surprising depths.
Like Roscoe Conklin, the police officer who works with Reacher in season 1. She's tough, she's smart, and she doesn't back down, even when she's dealing with a guy who's basically a human tank.
Roscoe is a great example of someone who challenges how Reacher sees things. She represents the best of law enforcement, the ideal that Reacher himself used to believe in. But she also understands the limits of the system, the frustrations that can push someone like Reacher to take the law into his own hands.
Yeah, their dynamic is really interesting. They're always pushing each other's buttons. But there's also this underlying respect, even a bit of attraction, you know.
It's that classic opposites attract thing. They come from different worlds, they have different ideas about justice, but they're both trying to achieve the same thing, to take down the bad guys and protect the innocent.
And the show really explores the complexity of their relationship, the tension between their personal and professional lives, the ethical dilemmas they face.
And it's not just the good guys who are well-developed. The villains in Reacher are compelling, too. They're not just your typical one-dimensional bad guys. They often have their own twisted sense of justice or misguided beliefs, which makes them even more dangerous and unpredictable.
Like Kleiner, the corrupt businessman from season 1. He's ruthless and greedy, but he also really believes that he's doing what's best for his town, even if it means breaking the law.
That kind of moral ambiguity is what makes the show so interesting. It makes you question your own ideas about good and evil. You start to see the world through the eyes of characters who aren't simply good or bad.
And those shades of gray apply to Reacher himself, too. He's not a perfect hero. He can be very violent. He operates outside the law. And he's not afraid to cross the line when he thinks it's necessary.
But that's what makes him so human, so relatable. He's a product of his experiences, the trauma he's gone through, the world he's had to survive in.
And it's those flaws, those contradictions that make him such a great character. He's not a superhero. He's a man who's trying to do what's right, even if he's not always sure what that is.
And that struggle, that search for meaning and purpose is something a lot of people can connect with. We're all trying to figure things out in a world that can feel pretty chaotic and unfair. And a character like Reacher, with all his flaws and complexities, gives us a bit of hope. A reminder that even when things are tough, there are still people who will stand up for what they believe in.
You know, we've talked about the show's themes, the characters, the visuals, the music, but there's one more thing I want to mention before we finish up: the humor.
Oh yeah, the humor. It's such an important part of Reacher, and it often keeps the show from getting too dark and intense.
Yeah. I love Reacher's dry wit, how he can just drop a one-liner.
Yeah.
That's funny and insightful at the same time.
It's like he's always noticing how absurd the world is, and his humor is his way of dealing with it.
It's also how he connects with other people.
Yeah.
He might not be the most emotionally open guy, but his humor shows that he's not completely closed off.
Exactly, and it's often in those humorous moments that we see his humanity, his vulnerability. It reminds us that he's not just a killing machine, he's a man trying to find his place in the world just like everyone
Yeah,
else.
and I think that's a big reason why people have connected with Reacher so much. It's a show that's entertaining and makes you think. It delivers the action and the suspense, but it also explores these bigger themes of justice, morality, what it means to be human.
It's a show that's both gritty and heartwarming. It makes you think, it makes you laugh. And in the end, you feel like you've spent time with a character who's both larger than life and surprisingly relatable.
Yeah, it's that mix, that mix of grit and heart that makes Reacher so compelling. You get the action, the mystery, but there's also that exploration of like what it means to be human, to deal with tough choices and try to do what's right even when the world's throwing you curveballs. But I want to go back to something we talked about earlier, that idea of Reacher as this like modern day knight errant. It's a common thing you see in crime dramas, but Reacher seems to do it differently. What do you think about that?
Hmm. That's an interesting point. You're right. The lone wolf who's out there delivering justice. Outside the system is a pretty familiar story. But I think what makes Reacher different is how it puts that story in a modern setting, with a character who's both super capable and also flawed. He's not a superhero. He's a man who's been shaped by his experiences, good and bad. And he carries that with him everywhere.
And it's both physical and emotional, right?
Yeah.
You see it in how he carries himself, how he moves through the world. He's a force to be reckoned with. But there's also this sense of weariness, like he's seen too much darkness, too much injustice.
Exactly. And that weariness, that disillusionment makes him even more relatable. I think a lot of people today feel that way too. Like the world is just this messy, complicated place where right and wrong aren't always clear.
And it's interesting that even though he's this amazing fighter, a guy who can take on a whole room full of bad guys without breaking a sweat, he's not invincible. He gets hurt. He makes mistakes. He has to adapt all the time.
Right, that vulnerability is really important to making him a believable character. It reminds us that even the strongest, most capable people are still human. They have their limits, they mess up, and they're not immune to pain and suffering.
And that goes back to the show's exploration of morality, right? Reacher lives in this gray area where the law doesn't always have the answers. And he has to make these difficult choices that sometimes have consequences he didn't expect.
Yeah, and the show doesn't shy away from how complicated those choices are. It makes us face the fact that sometimes, even when you're trying to do good, you might end up causing more harm.
It's something that a lot of crime dramas deal with. But Reacher handles it with a certain nuance, the kind of realism that avoids easy answers.
And that's what makes it so thought-provoking. It doesn't tell you what to think. It shows you a situation, a character struggling in a complex world, and it lets you figure things out for yourself.
It's a show that respects its audience. And I think that's a big part of its success. People are tired of being told what to think. They want to be challenged. They want to think for themselves, and Reacher gives them that chance.
And it does all of that while still being entertaining. You get the thrills, the suspense, the action, but you also get something more, something that sticks with you.
It works on so many different levels.
Huh.
And I think that shows how talented the writers, the directors, the actors, everyone involved is.
And of course, we can't forget Lee Child for creating Reacher in the first place and making sure the show stays true to his vision.
Absolutely. You can tell that everyone who worked on the show has a huge respect for the books. And you see that in every episode.
And it's definitely paid off. Reacher is a massive hit. It's brought the character to a whole new audience.
It just goes to show that sometimes the most basic stories, the ones that tap into our basic need for justice and order, are the ones that resonate the most.
And when those stories are told well, with intelligence and a bit of heart, they can really change how we see the world and ourselves.
Well, I think we've pretty much covered everything about Reacher. We've talked about the character, the themes, the way it looks, the music, the humor, the whole impact of the show. But before we go, I want to leave you with one last thought.
Okay, listening.
As you keep diving into Reacher's world, think about this. What does this character say about our world today? What does it tell us about our fears, our hopes, our search for meaning? In a world that often feels chaotic and uncertain.
Wow, that's a really good question. I think Reacher's popularity says something about how much we want a certain kind of hero, someone who represents strength, resilience, and the willingness to fight for what's right even when it's hard.
He reminds us that even when things are tough, there's still hope. There's still room for bravery, and that one person can actually make a difference.
That's a message we all need to hear sometimes.
Yeah, well said. I think that's a perfect way to wrap things up. So until next time, happy watching and keep exploring.